We have a sizable group of folks who are joining us across the country on Zoom and Facebook Live. So you all wave to everybody that's on the room. You do that? Okay. We have a bunch of first-timers here today, and we're going to have an awesome session today. And I'm going to lay the groundwork, and then we're going to have a lot of good questions and feedback. But before we start, I'd like to recognize first-timers. So if you brought someone with you for the first time, would you introduce to you our honored guest? Would you do that? Anybody? Yes, sir.
Brian Vanderwater. He used to run one of my largest plants, and he's now president of another company here in town, and he's now in the consulting line. So if you need any help, he can help.
Brian, we welcome you.
Thank you.
We're glad to have you. David.
Yeah, I brought my friend Chris Hansen. Chris and I go to an emotional intelligence class, which is kind of the foundational stuff that leads to the leadership transformation that we teach here at Initiative One. And we've been having a great couple of months together, right?
Chris, we welcome you. I said to Chris, you're just too cool to be here. And he says, I know. Chris, we welcome you, buddy. Who else? Yes, ma'am.
I'm Rachel, and I have my cousin Kay here today. She is exploring leadership resources, and I needed another branch of it.
Got it. Welcome. Kay, we're glad you're here with us. Thank you so much. Anybody else? Yes.
Well, I guess I would like to introduce Rachel, our new team member here.
Rachel is our newest team member that just started on Monday, a week ago Monday. Yeah. And she's a rock star. She's already raised the bar for the rest of us, and we're glad that you're here with us. Anybody else? Yes.
My name is Brad, and this is an old friend of mine, Brad Wiedenhoff from Shank. And we just got talking a couple weeks back about leadership, and I told him about this program, and he was very interested in attending.
Hey, Brad, welcome. I haven't seen these guys ever be this friendly. Welcome. Yes, Jeff.
I would like to introduce Catherine Crow, our new marketing manager for downtown Green Bay.
Catherine. Hi. Good to see you.
She was up at 5 this morning doing some media for the Winter Farmers Market Saturday morning. So.
Okay. Welcome.
Thank you.
We have a member of our team on your board now, don't we? Awesome. Okay, who else? Yes. Julie Davis from
Durham County. Big Brothers.
Big Brothers.
I'm sorry. Boys and girls.
Julie's here for the first time with us. We already have had a delightful conversation that we'll build on in our session. So I want to say to all of you, did I miss anybody else? Okay, welcome. We're going to have an awesome session. So let me get into it. Abby picks out our subjects. So she told me yesterday what I'm speaking on. And it's called Ramp It Up. It's an acronym. And we're going to talk about very quickly 4 key disciplines that are essential for having high performance, high health teams of high trust, high focus, powerful decision making, and that people love coming to work because they enjoy being with each other. Our goal is to create an environment that people love coming to work, they love who they work with, they're loving what they're doing, and it is an extension of the joy from their personal side. And when you do that, you create incredible passion. And people who are passionate are very easy to engage. So let's talk about that. The first of the acronym, RAMP, is R. And here's what that means. What gets rewarded gets repeated. What gets rewarded gets repeated. Julie and I were talking about the challenges of how leading millennials is completely different than leading the younger part of Xers and boomers. And here's what we know. Today, it is absolutely essential if you're going to have a high culture of accountability. There is no such thing as a healthy, focused team that does not have accountability. We're going to talk further about that in just a second. But accountability does not root in an environment where people do not feel appreciated or valued. Did you hear that? Accountability cannot root itself in an environment where people do not feel appreciated or valued. And here's why. Accountability without reward and recognition looks mean-spirited. Did you hear that? Accountability, having the hard discussions, looks mean-spirited without reward and recognition. Because reward and recognition with your people is what puts water in the well. It's what puts water in the well so that when you have the hard conversation, they know that you believe in them. And they know where your motives are. Does that make sense? And so I've had, conversely, reward and recognition without accountability looks weak-spirited. Well, you tell everybody that, okay? The fact is, they have to be balanced by what? By each other. And so that's the balance that allows accountability to work. Now, I've had people, especially from German cultures, who will say, I don't need to tell my people thank you. I tell them thank you every 2 weeks with this piece of paper. And, you know, that sounds good, but the reality is, how many here appreciate someone telling us that we've done an excellent job? Every single one of us. It is a basic core human need. Maslow said after food, air, and water, it is the next basic need that we have. That every one of us has the need to feel appreciated. 2 of the most powerful leadership words that you can possibly say are simply this: thank you. And what we know is if you're in a situation that you cannot reward your team because of financial limitations, which is the extrinsic benefit, that is actually tolerable to people if they are feeling intrinsically valued. Does that make sense? It is huge. And yet we've been taught that if you go out of if it becomes part of your leadership style to constantly looking for things to say thank you for, we've been taught that's weak. No, that's not weak, it's smart. It is smart. Oh, and if you're doing it so that they'll work better, then that's manipulation. You're doing it, why? Why are you doing it? What's your motive? Is it a business tool? Is it a gimmick? Is it a tactic? What are you doing it for? Tony?
Make them feel appreciated.
It's the right thing to do. It's the right way to do. So we teach people that, do you have in your leadership toolbox a systematic way in which you're telling people how much I appreciate it? Let me tell you a story. Several years ago, I was working with a large company, and the CEO, I was doing quite a bit of coaching with him in addition to working with the team. And he bought into this, this idea that I gave him, that carry a little sticky pad and just carry it in his pocket and a pen at all times. And if he saw something in real time that emulated the value system and the culture that they wanted, to stop right there, write a note, and say, Joe, Bill, Cindy, Sally, Margaret, just want you to know what I just saw. I appreciated it so much. And I encouraged him to write 1 to 2 thank you notes, handwritten, every single week. 1 to 2 handwritten thank you notes to members of his team that he saw was the kind of behavior or attitude that he wanted to lift up. Make sense? So he had a blue, his favorite color was blue. And so he got into this habit. He started walking the floor. And if he saw something, he would stop, pull it out, take his blue, his sticky pad, and he would write it, and then he would stick it on the this is the days when you had those huge monitors that were about this deep, and he would stick it on the monitor and go on his way. And so one day, and he just loved doing it. So one day he walks out into the plant, and he's going into the lunchroom to hang out with the folks. And he hears this conversation right as he goes in. And it goes like this. Hey, did you get your sticky note? Yeah, I got my sticky note. Did you get your sticky note? And the whole room was laughing and so forth. Well, it hurt him. It not only hurt him, but then he said, it's not value. Not only is it not value, it's backfiring. Forget this hokey. And he quit. Well, 6 months later, they did one of these review processes, random review processes. And they evaluated what his leadership had been in the last 6 months. And he was shocked to find that the #1 complaint was what? He quit giving sticky notes. That was the #1 complaint. I said, can't you understand what they were doing? They did not have either the emotional maturity or the leadership ability to be able to say out loud, I really appreciate it. So they were with all their buddies and they had to act tough, but in reality, they were loving it. But every one of them in the room was loving it, but no one had the courage to say it. Make sense? Do you have a system in which you are showing how much you appreciate your people? But guess who is the biggest benefiter of that kind of a practice? Guess who? We are. Because it changes our perspective. Don't ever forget this. You will always get what you look for. You will always get what you look for. If you're cynical and you're bitter and you're tired and you think that everyone is there doing a conspiracy on you, guess what you're going to find? You're going to find 15 people to back up your claim. If you believe in people that are intrinsically good and that they're good-hearted, that they can make mistakes, but most people want to be responsible and they want to be givers, guess what you're going to find? You're going to find the same thing. You will get what you look for every time. And that is part of your attitude. So the first of this acronym is reward. You get what you reward. Oh, by the way, you can also reward bad behavior by not addressing behavior. You understand that? Because people will look at that as you letting it get by, as you are actually affirming that kind of behavior. Ben, you've seen in your own company that kind of an issue. And you recently decided to deal with it. What was the outcome?
Well, it just totally changed the team. When you start addressing the problem, you're not rewarding it, I guess.
Yeah.
That's what we found.
Yeah, it's changed the culture, hasn't it? So let's talk about the next one, accountability. Now let's talk about accountability. Accountability in our culture is not accountability. In our culture, accountability is bullying. It is a gotcha moment. You know what I'm talking about? Hey, you screwed up, and I'm going to have a conversation with you about how you screwed up. And actually, I'm going to take and I don't say it out loud, but I'm actually going to feel a little bit of delight in having this conversation. Because it makes me feel better about me that I'm finding how you screwed up. You ever seen that before? That is not accountability, that is emotional immaturity. Accountability is not embarrassing someone, it's not making an example out of them, it is not making them feel bad, it is not shaming them up. Gang, you cannot shame people up to higher performance. Accountability is simply this. It is helping the other person to win by helping them to honor the commitments that they have made to themselves and others. Did you hear that? Accountability is helping another to win by helping them to honor the commitments that they have made to themselves and to other people. Accountability is one of the most respectful, caring things that you can possibly do for someone else. Did you hear that? That's a whole different approach, isn't it? It's a whole different approach. And if you walk in with it with that mindset, it will be critical in the performance of your team and raising the bar for that individual. You cannot have a healthy team that doesn't practice accountability. Now, here's the challenge in such a short time frame that we have. Our signature process, the first phase is 3 months, 9 sessions, 27 hours. And we spend, Dave, how much? Paul, how much? Hours and hours and hours teaching people how to give accountability, how to receive accountability. What are all the emotional barriers from our childhood that cause you? How many of us think that accountability, let's be honest here, what is your first impression of when you hear the word accountability? Does it feel good or does it feel punitive? Punitive. And the reason why it feels punitive, you all have heard me talk about that there are either performance-based leaders or there are being-based leaders. Being-based leaders find their validity, their self-validation, their ability to feel good about themselves. Being-based leaders find that from within themselves, from their spiritual lives, from their own internal emotional health, from their self-belief. It comes from within. Make sense? Most of us have such a lack of self-belief in ourselves that we do not believe that's possible. So we find that validity source from where? Not inside, but where? Outside. And that's what we call performance-based. And performance-based leadership is where I have to make you happy so that you'll feel good about me. So that what? I can feel good about me. And when you do that as a performance-based leader, you cannot win. You can't win. As a former pastor of a large congregation in Detroit, I could make a decision that made 1,000 people happy. And at the same time, it kicked off 400 people. Make sense? And I will tell you, I spiraled. One of my, I have multi-addictions from 20 years ago that my life fell apart. And my primary addiction is workaholism, where I had to please people by working my tail off. And I needed to hear, oh, no one has the work ethic that you do. Oh, thank you. Please. and I needed to hear that. I needed to hear that affirmation. But anybody that wasn't happy with what I did, whoa, I spiraled down. And that leads to hopelessness. It leads to no matter what you do, no one appreciates it. And so the problem with accountability is this. True accountability is nothing more than an assessment of the performance that you committed to. With me? However, if I'm performance-based and my whole sense of value is based upon how I see, how you see how I'm performing, the act of accountability now becomes, it's not a piece of information, it's what? What is it? It is a personal what? It's a personal attack. Even though I mean nothing about it. Your filter system is, I'm not talking to you about how you're dealing with your department. You look at that and say, we're not talking about my department. We're talking about what? We're talking about me and my mama. This is a personal attack. And so one of the things that you have to do in order to have a high accountability culture, over and over, you have to teach your people that this is not a statement of your values. This is not a statement that I don't believe in you. This is simply an area that is a learning opportunity for us that we need to embrace to get better. That's it. Make sense? And yet, so that is why the whole reward thing is so important. Because one of the things that makes accountability go down easier is I need to know, do you really care about me and what are your motives? Is this a gotcha moment? Or are you doing this because you believe in me? Make sense? Any thoughts? Yes, sir. Tony.
The hard thing about that sometimes is it needs to be a proactive process because you can't explain that this isn't about you and your mama in the moment when you're giving them feedback about
That's
something.
right.
You need to have talked about it beforehand. So when the whatever hits the fan.
Yeah. He said poo-poo.
Yes. It's a lot more difficult to give the feedback if you haven't said, here's my expectations, and then also here is how we will approach this process.
Did you guys hear that? That is powerful. Because if you just, while you're doing it, you're sensing the person's defensive, and you go, hey, this is just information, they're not going to hear it. They are already in full-fledged defense mode. Make sense? So it really does require an ongoing commitment to constantly be lifting people up. In our culture, when we hire folks, we are very upfront that we put everything on the table here. We put everything on the table. That also means we are quick to praise each other. We have each other's back. But if one of us is letting one of our teammates or themselves down, we're going to have a conversation. Abby, would you agree that first when you came on our team, and she hasn't been around enough to see it yet, but it's going to happen. You will be on that moment. It's just a gift. What did it feel like the first time we began to have these frank conversations and putting things on the table and really being transparent?
Well, it's refreshing, and it really gets projects moving. It gets things going because everyone's willing to share. You know, me coming in as a new team member right off the bat, you know, Abby, what do you think? Abby, what is this? You know, this is, it's powerful.
Did you hear that? For accountability to work, you've got to have a team environment of inclusion. For accountability to work, you have to have a team environment of inclusion. Yes, sir.
But let's not forget for the new folks though, but the foundational piece though, right, are the norms.
Yes.
Right. And so when we talk, Tony, when we talk, have that hard conversation, and we've got to be able to reflect back on the norms. That's the foundation that allows us to have that conversation, and that creates the language
right.
and so on.
That's right. There is a systematic way that you can teach your people that as long as we stay within these agreements of how we're going to give information to each other and receive information, as long as we stay within these agreements that we have said, this is what I need from each other and how we solve problems and deal with issues. As long as you deliver the information like this and we behave this way, that's what creates trust and safety. And so, Abby, we all challenge each other. Accountability, by the way, does not go just like this. Would you agree with that? Accountability is 3D. It goes this way, it also goes how? Goes this way, and even more importantly, the most powerful form of accountability is which way? Sideways. Peer accountability is far more important than positional accountability. It's far more effective. Oh, if you're performance-based, you're not going to have those conversations. Because I don't want you to get upset with me because I just told you that you need to do a better job of how you're handling the situation. This is a deep thing. And gang, this is not meant to be a deep primer, a thesis on this. All we're trying to do is put out seeds here and help you to understand there's a whole science behind all of this that can help you guys to become dynamic leaders. Does that make sense? Now, here's the tough part. The tough part is when those conversations they don't feel good. And you recognize, man, I really messed up. And it's real easy for your emotional impact, your emotional state to go south. And recently, Abby and I had a conversation, and I mentioned Abby because she's part of my team, and I trust her implicitly.
I'm sitting in the back.
You're sitting in the back. So she comes from a background, just like mine, that you got to make everybody happy. That was part of her family system. And so when we had a conversation, she backed off for 2 or 3 days. It was not Abby. And when I got back, I had to sit down with Abby and said, Abby, you remember, and by the way, I've had this conversation with every member of my team, that Abby, remember what we said, that just because you're uncomfortable does not mean it's inappropriate. Just because the information that has been delivered to you in the form of accountability makes you uncomfortable does not mean you've been attacked. Your people will go there. Oh, you're attacking me. Well, why? Because you make me feel uncomfortable. Gang, if you don't get out of your comfort zone, you don't grow. Agree with that? So there's a whole science behind accountability. Third is measurement. What gets measured gets produced. Let me give you a quick tool. You all have heard about the Pareto principle, that 80% of your activity and your focus will create that 20% of your activity and your focus, 20%, will create 80% of your desired impact. Make sense? And so here's what I've done with executives before. Let me give you a little an exercise here. Do a 1-week time study. Have your team say, I want you to take a given week, a typical week from Monday to Friday. And I want you in half-hour increments to write down in general form, what did you do that you felt was part of your responsibility during that given half hour. At the end of the week, you take all those things and you write it on a list. And you write down everything that you thought was part of your responsibility. And then you do what we call Paretotize it. Which one of these were ones and twos? That's the top of the list. Which one of these were 3 through 7? Which are those things that need to be done on a daily basis for order and maintenance of the organization. And it's not even a question of whether they should be done. They have to be done. They're the essence of the business. And which are the 8, 9s, and 10s? The 8, 9s, and 10s are those things that you're doing just to make everybody else happy. It's responding or reacting to the person who's screaming the most. It is the drama land of the organization. Yes, sir.
I got an example that's a great analogy to this, that one of the companies I led, the team was so caught up they couldn't work on strategic initiatives because they were fighting fires all day.
All day.
So I took them through an exercise. We defined a fire. In a year, we had one defined fire. And I led them through that 8, 9s, and 10s approach, not using those words, but what are those things that are just the noise that get in the way of what you need to do that don't matter?
Yeah.
Get rid of those, create the time to work on the strategic
It's
things,
huge.
the results come.
And what we find is the majority of organizations stay in what is a fire, what they believe is a fire that is not a fire. Make sense? And so what you do, you go through that list and you say, which one of these are the 1s and 2s? And then you ask each of your people to do that. And so they'll come to you in a meeting and you say, okay, I've been thinking about this. What do you think are the 1s and 2s, those 3 or 4 things in your job responsibility that if you nail it, if you do well, you will succeed because you've hit the majority of it right there. So that person goes in and you go in with your identity, with your sense of what that person's 1s and 2s are. And then you have a conversation. And you figure out together what those 3 to 4 key things are that create the greatest impact. You agree upon that, and that's what you begin to hold that person accountable for. Make sense? That's a measurement process. And lastly, what gets planned gets produced. What gets planned, what gets measured gets moved, what gets planned gets produced. And we're not going to go into any time with that because I want to give the last few minutes for questions. But essentially what we teach, Brian and I were having a conversation before, one of the things that we've learned from world-class companies is they have an objective decision frame that they build and how they plan and what they do. What is their vision or what is their purpose? What are their 3 to 5 critical non-negotiable values? And do you have the courage to make tough decisions based on those things? And if you're not willing to stand and face the heat to protect that value, it's not a value. If you're not willing to take the heat to protect that value, it's not a value. And the last is, what are the 2 to 3 key critical goals that if you focus on over a couple-year period, it will elevate your organization toward your purpose big time. It's called your decision frame. RAMP. What gets rewarded gets repeated. Accountability. What gets held accountable gets action. And measurement gets moved. And what gets planned gets produced. Pretty cool, isn't it? Thoughts, questions. Come on, we've got 10 minutes. Let's talk. What's on your mind? Stephen.
The whole thing that all this puts together for me is what I experienced as I was leading people, the trust factor. Once you build that up, they aren't afraid to say something because it's going to be negatively received. It won't be negatively received, it's input. Yeah. And when you can put them at a level playing with yourself, then you're going to give trust. They're going to give trust. And the hardest thing as a leader, I think, was to get past the fact that I don't feel I can do anything right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, sir.
I'll also say it's a spiral. It's either an upward spiral or a downward spiral. It's the way you talk about with accountability. We tend sometimes to take good actions for granted and only have the tough questions on the assessment. If you think of it, if you start out, if half your meetings, 50% of your accountability meetings are for good accountability and 50% are for bad, the more you push the good, the more you will find that all of your meetings will be good and good and good. If you're having all your meetings focusing on the bad, you will find more and more need to have meetings on the bad. So spend your time to begin with. When you start this thing out, you've got to make sure that you're really pushing. You might almost want to keep an own personal score to make sure that somewhere over 50% of your accountable meetings are good things. And that takes away a lot of the fear that people have when you're going to have a meeting.
Yeah, powerful. Great stuff. Who else? Yes, sir. Dennis.
Just leading into that, one of the tools we've gone through the process, one of the tools was, what's your win today? You know, and our team has always spent time on what's going wrong, right? Whoa, what's going bad? And by shifting that focus in our Monday huddles and when we as a group and in our one-on-ones, just starting with what's your win today? What's going on? What good has happened? And it's amazing in 2 months how people are able to just think so much more easily about the good that's going on in their lives. It doesn't have to be about work. Just get them talking about positive. That's been a really great.
That's right. Yes, sir.
There's a Fredism that follows on that.
What's that?
That's the one, a yard may be hard, but an inch is a cinch.
Yeah.
So when you look for those wins, even an inch is a win that you can reward. And it just kind of builds.
That's huge. Your people are not used to having wins celebrated. Because what we'll do, we'll mention the wins and go, okay, now let's get on to the important stuff. You spend 45 minutes on the screw up, okay? Gang. In our own company, we had a recent situation where we had to make a very tough decision regarding one of our divisions and one of our people. And it was hard. It was agonizing to make that decision because it was someone we care about very deeply. And when for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And so when you're going to make a bold decision to protect a value, there's going to be blowback every single time. Well, when the blowback comes back, it's easy to focus on just what? And you get a distorted feeling. Oh my gosh, look at what's going wrong here, what's going wrong here. Guess what you have to remember to give you perspective in that time? All of the wins that are happening. Wow, and my team has done that, you know, but look at all of the incredible things that are happening and the people that are reaching out to us from around the country that we didn't even know exist. The wins are critical to give you the confidence when things are challenging. It gives people the rope to hold on to. Yes, sir, John Mako.
Fred, I just want to throw something out and maybe a little different perspective and encourage the group, because I think, and we built two companies, each have a couple hundred employees and some other stuff. So, you know, I think this culture permeates what we do. But as a guy who has 5.7 million critics every day, I think as we start getting good at what we're doing, then that permeates who we are as individuals. Because some of the stuff that I think and I'm not just talking about something for myself or Mr. Merkus, you know, I'm just saying right now, our culture is absolutely volatile and disgusting to me. And so people that would never treat their employees that way, would never treat their children that way, their spouse that way, any other organization, because they want this constructive behavior in public, it's absolutely awful. So I think what happens is if we start to permeate, if this culture of lifting up and constructive criticism is how we work and we get better at it, and everybody says accentuating and positive, and catch people doing stuff wrong instead of catching them doing stuff wrong, that hopefully that permeates into you know, just how society is in general. So how do we carry that beyond our own organization is maybe my point.
The hard thing is keyboard courage. You're not seeing someone face to face. Like, I wouldn't say this to you, but I'll certainly type it on the internet.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Someone was about to say something. Paul,
Fred, I was going
and
to
then
say
Brian.
something back to what Tony was sharing about the power of language, where our punitive view of accountability, we hear so often in the beginning of our processes, people will say things like, well, you know, Fred called me out.
Yeah.
Rather than saying, Fred, help me keep a commitment, or Fred, help bring out the best in me. You know, and I think the shift in language is powerful.
That's
and
right.
that relates to keyboard
That's right.
as well.
That's right. Have you ever heard someone say that? Hey, I called him out. No, that's not accountability. That's a gotcha moment. So when you hear one of your teammates do that, say, time out. No, it's not we called someone out, as we're helping someone to win. And you deal with it in real time to change that language. It changes the concept. Pat, what are you thinking?
I'm thinking I'm completely agreeing with that. And we've seen that with our own team. When we started with you guys and we were going through with Tracy, and we had a couple of people say, hey, she called me out.
Yeah.
What happens now is it's so transparent now and people get it.
Yeah, good stuff. Yes, Julie, and then Brian.
You know, I would love to hear those of you who have gone through this process. I have a very young millennial team. I have millennials who are supervising millennials. And so I listen to this and I'm like, yeah, I get it. But how do I start that process? It's almost like I'm sitting here thinking, what percentage of reward do I need to talk about before we can really get to accountability? And then how do I have millennial supervisors who are trying to do this when they're really first experiencing this? It seems a little daunting as I listen to it. I understand. Help me.
I'm not going to answer the question. I'm going to let you guys answer it. Glenn.
To that, I would say there are people in your organization likely who everyone views as folks who have great affinity for the organization and the people in it, to the point of seeing them almost like family, but who also are gatekeepers for whether or not a new change to the organization is promoted or rejected. If you can find those people and use them as a sounding board for your thoughts and collect information from them, that's a great way to, I don't want to use the word manage, but to engage in the kinds of things we've been talking about.
What do we call them?
Thoughtful leaders. Ed and I are in the same class together, and I think both of us have looked at our organizations and found those people. Those are the people that if you have something you're going to roll out of the organization, you talk to them first, make sure that they're on board with it, have them beat it up. Because if they're the ones, if they're behind it, it's going to happen. If they're not behind it, no way it's going to happen.
Because that's where sideways accountability comes from.
That's right.
Those people.
That's right. Let me give you an encouraging thought. You may think you're the leader of your organization, but you're not. Okay? And once you accept that, that's when you begin to be the leader of your organization. Every organization has 50 to 60% of your people that we call bandwagoners. They show up for a job, don't ask us to do anything more, but they want to do good work. And they are critical for the success of an organization. That's 50 to 60%. Then above that, you have your thoughtful leaders, which is 20%. And your 20% are the thoughtful leaders, that, regardless of position or title, who have the highest level of trust with those folks. And they are the folks that are the Mikeys that say, I like the cereal, or I don't like the cereal. If that Mikey says, I like the cereal, guess what happens with the 50 to 60? They go, I love it too. Now, I don't want to be the first one to try it. I'm glad Mikey did, but I'm on board. The fact is, they are the ones who are the real leaders of the organization because they have the highest level of trust. Then you have the primary leaders, which are 10%. They are the master problem solvers in the organization. They create the plan. And the visionaries are the ones that bring the plan. The fact is, if you figure out who your thoughtful leaders are, they're the ones who sell the plan. But they will not sell the plan without their input and without inclusion. And so, Julie, what you just said is it does feel daunting, but you got to learn where do you start first. And those folks, by focusing on that 20%, they will give you 80% of the leadership leverage that you need. Yes, sir. A couple more questions. We'll wrap it up.
So just back to you talking about the accountability and trying to get away from that negative connotation. One of the approaches that I've used for a long time that really helps is driving this statement. I drove it a lot, is focus on fixing the problem, not fixing the blame. Yeah. And when you do that and you say that to your team, and that's the way you lead and you approach when things don't go right, I believe that most of the time it was a system problem.
94% of issues are not people, are not caused by poor people, they're caused by poor systems.
And if you do that, and that's how and that's just words that I've used to help people get it in their mind and how to do it, then they start to think that way and they realize that we're gonna have arms around each other looking at the problem first.
Right.
There are times there's people issues you need to deal with that too, but if you focus there, it's powerful.
Yes, sir. Pat, and then lastly, Terry.
I was just going to echo what you were saying about getting the thoughtful leaders involved. So in our younger years, Dennis and I kind of steamrolled over some of our thoughtful leaders probably in an effort just to keep moving, get things done, right?
Yeah.
So, and even as we got into some of this process, I'm like, this is going to take forever to get a decision if we're getting them involved. But the quality of the decisions, the buy-in and all that coming out of it, it's actually going faster.
Because you eliminate the passive aggressive resistance.
Because we're not going back and rehashing.
That's right. That's right. Great comment. Last, but and then we'll wrap it up. Terry.
Well, it kind of goes with the start of all this. When you're talking about ideas and things for people, I'm sure everybody in the room has heard the term devil's advocate. And I'm going to be the devil's advocate. That's what everybody jumps into. How many people have heard the term? How many people have been the angel's advocate? So every time somebody brings an idea, people are going to put on, oh, let me be the devil's advocate. So here's all the bad things. The thing is, as the leaders, okay, we're also going to take some time. I want everybody to put on the other hat. I want to be the angel's advocate, and let's see what all the good things are about this. Then when we've got the list, we can then talk about ideas on here. And that gets people so, they aren't afraid of things.
That's powerful. I'm going to take that idea and I'm going to use it. Next week when I use it, I'm going to say, this is Terry's idea. Next month when I use it, I'm going to say it's a friend's idea. 6 months from now, someone told me anonymously. And a year from now, the other day I was thinking about it. That's right. So you all, has this been helpful? Yes. Listen, the people in this room are here because you're all hungry to get better. There are let iron sharpen iron. Get to know each other, you guys. You think differently than the rest of the 99%. So I thank you for being here. We're going to do this again next month. Just watch your email. I don't know when the date is. Feel free to invite folks. By the way, a lot of our folks now are going and viewing this the next day on Facebook Live. And so it becomes a record that you guys can go back and look at. So we're just trying to give you information. Okay? Let's give ourselves a hand.